Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode of The Amateur Traveler is brought to you by Intrepid Travel, off the beaten path experiences to over 100 fascinating countries on all 7 continents. Visit intrepidtravel.com for more info.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 332. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about trekking and mountains and refugios as we go to Mont Blanc in France.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have 2 news stories for you. The first one underlines a difference between Europe and where I live in the U.S. A court gives Europeans the option to retake vacations if you get sick. You know how unfortunate it is when you get sick on vacation. If you live in Europe, you can get more vacation days and take the vacation over. I'm jealous. But I'm not jealous of the reaction that some plane hijackers ran into when they tried to hijack a plane in China recently. They were beaten, 2 of them so severely that they died. Don't hijack a plane in China. Put that on your list. For links to both of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. And in other news, you may have noticed the Amateur Traveler now has a sponsor. We're being sponsored by Intrepid Travel. Get off the beaten track with Intrepid Travel. Intrepid travelers discover real people and real cultures on over 1,000 different trips in 100 countries. Traveling in small groups averaging 10 people allows for complete cultural immersion, while local guides ensure authentic, safe experiences. Intrepid brings positive benefits to their host communities and is committed to traveling in a way that is respectful of local people and cultures. For more information and to request a free brochure, visit intrepidtravel.com. That's intrepidtravel.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Mark Barish, a tech exec and avid traveler coming to us from the San Francisco Bay Area, and come to talk to us about an area of France we haven't yet talked about. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
And I'll let you introduce where are we talking about today?
Well, this is Mont Blanc, the giant mountain, which sits at the intersection of France and Italy and Switzerland. And the specific area is called Tour Mont Blanc, which is the track that circumnavigates the entire mountain.
And is it true that Mont Blanc was named after a pen?
Very few people know that, but it happens to be true. It is just an amazing area that sits there in the high Alps, all alpine terrain. And just a few numbers to help situate this for people. The track itself is about 120 miles long, which people typically hike in 10, 11 days. And the massif runs from the northeast down to the southwest, sort of on a diagonal. The peak is around 15,000 feet. The trail itself varies between 7 and 10, so quite a bit lower than the peak that's in the center. But every day there's about a mile gain in altitude for a total of about 35,000 feet. Which is a mile higher than Everest, but not straight up. That's up and down and up and down and up and down every day. And then the mountain is defined, in a sense, by 7 mountain passes, which in French are known as cols, C-O-L. So there's, Col de Boza and many others that every day you plan. It's about one a day, and that defines exactly what's going to happen for you.
Okay. And why should I go to Mont Blanc, first of all?
Well, if your listeners enjoy just amazing scenery and really friendly people and fantastic air and great food, then I think it's certainly on the short list of best places on the planet.
And you say great food, and that says to me that this is not like a trek in the Himalayas. It's not a rural and rustic and oh so far away from the amenities that one thinks of when one travels to France.
Well, in a sense it is, and in another sense it's not. For those who are doing the TMB, or TMB, as they call it in French, from end to end, every night you can stay in these old stone refugios, these houses that are built specifically for trekkers, where you get dinner and breakfast and a bed, sometimes in a dorm, sometimes in a small room with other people. And then they kind of serve you one menu, whatever they have that night, but they're always hearty meals, very reflective of the country's culture that you're in, because you traverse between the 3 countries.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
And, you've been hiking all day, so everything just tastes delicious, whether it's a hearty soup to start with. But, of course, since this is in a very well-populated area, the mountain is located above the town of Chamonix, which people know quite well. And there's at least 4 or 5 relatively nice-sized towns and cities that you pass through or nearby. In each one of those, if you weren't a hiker for the whole trek and just doing a day trek, you would be able to go into that town and really enjoy wonderful food, even better than you get at the refugios.
And what led you personally to this hike, to this trek?
Well, every so often I have time or a break in my work, and I just sort of truly surf online, and I mean that, where I just start looking for the next place, the next trek, and I read blogs and I see all sorts of things, and then by magic I select one and boom, just narrow in on it, and the next thing you know, I'm standing on top of the mountain somewhere. Once I thought I was going to go to Belize, and I ended up in China on a trail that you've covered already, leaving Tiger Gorge. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I got to China, but it was truly surfing through information that others had posted.
And was there one picture or one paragraph or one blog that just cinched the deal?
Well, there was one blog that I found, and it's an Australian fellow who wrote it, and unfortunately I can't recall his name. But just like I was on a very tight schedule and only had 7 days, while this is normally done in 10 or 11, he did it in 7 days and wrote a very extensive blog about it and how he chopped it up into 7 pieces instead of 10. And that meant that some days were very, very long, but you knew that in advance, and you saw how the whole mosaic fit together. So when I saw that, it really drove it home for me that this is a trek I ought to do, because he had sort of done the brain work on a 7-day and made it just like a for sure thing for me.
And where do you fly into to get to this area?
Well, you could go to a number of European cities in the general area. I flew into Geneva.
Okay, I was wondering about that. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's closest to Geneva, at least on the French side, even though Geneva's in Switzerland. But what I recall doing is just taking a quick cab to a tiny little train station on the outskirts of Geneva, not a main one, but almost looked like it was shut down, and grabbed a 2-hour train to Les Houches. Houche, which is a tiny town near Chamonix, about 20 miles away. And for some reason, that's where people start the hike. Even though it's a circle, you could start it anywhere. That seems to be the most preferred spot. And then it's a short walk from the train station to the main street and hotels, and from there to the trailhead.
What surprised you about this trip? You didn't prepare this for years in advance, so I imagine there were a few days that caught you by surprise.
Well, everyone's seen the scenes of the incredible Alps and snow and craggy peaks, but seeing them in person is even more breathtaking. So I suppose that surprised me a little bit. But it was more on a people level. I was surprised at just how friendly everybody was and sort of the social scene of groups meeting on the trail. I mean, small groups of 2 and 3, not organized groups. I happened to be alone on this trek, but that means I flew alone in a plane because from the moment I got there, I just had great social interactions and hung out with 3 distinct groups of hikers over that 7-day period. So watching how the group sort of melded together and hiked together for several days, and then everyone's splitting off on their schedules or what have you, and you become sort of best friends in a short amount of time, like 6 hours. Because you're walking together, you're eating together, you're sort of sleeping together. Not necessarily that way, although that's not prohibited. But you're in a dorm, and you're just spending a lot of time, and it makes for very close relationships and very friendly ones. And that's what took me most by surprise, and I truly enjoyed that aspect of it.
And what time of year did you go?
I was there in the first days of July.
Okay.
And this is 2 years back, and the weather was perfect. And we had rain 1 or 2 days, but not bad. And nice and cool walking weather.
Now, you're coming from the East Bay here in San Francisco, so probably less than 100-foot elevation. And you're flying in, and everything, all of the hiking you're doing is starting at least a mile up.
That's right. Yes.
And you're doing this quickly in 7 days and then flying out again. Any problems with altitude? I just got back from Colorado, and the air gets kind of thin.
Well, you definitely feel it, certainly in the first day or two. I mean, I've been in Peru, but taken, on the Inca Trail, but really taken time to get used to the altitude in Cusco, and this was different. And I most certainly felt it. And one of the side effects that I felt and that others felt was this intense need to drink Coca-Cola. Bubbly, carbonated. I can't describe how much I needed that. And I didn't talk to a doctor for a physiological reason, but I think there is one. And I remember talking to some Swedes who never drink this stuff, and they had the exact same reaction. So I think that there was some kind of physical craving created there. But the first day is hardest, of course, especially because you're on the valley floor, which is about 3,000 feet, and then you go up to the first pass, Col de Voza, and that is, I don't know, but probably close to 7. In that quick ascent, you most definitely feel the altitude change.
Well, I certainly wish I'd known this thing about the Coca-Cola ahead of time. We could have worked out a sponsorship, perhaps, but...
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
And I wonder if it's for the sugar, if nothing else, too. Just the number of calories that you're consuming, there's a whole lot in those drinks.
Well, I had proper trail food, like Cliff Bars are my favorite. So I was good in terms of nutrition and sugar. I think it was the carbonation that somehow was just hitting the spot because of the altitude. But that's just a theory.
Favorite day of the trek? You had 7 days.
I had a number of just wonderful events. So in terms of the favorite day of hiking, it was about 3-4 days in, just about midpoint. There is a town called Champex, which is a beautiful town on a tiny lake, and that's where I met up with a group of Americans from Germany who were with the United States Air Force. And I was still hanging out with the prior group, which was 2 Swedes. So the 5 of us came together and formed this really cohesive group. And that particular day takes you up. There's 2 paths, the bad weather and the good weather. The good weather trek is the one you take. It's more strenuous, but it's more beautiful. And if the weather's bad, you take the other one. So we were on that first trek, and it takes you up to an area called, I'm going to mispronounce it unfortunately, but it's like Feneta d'Arpet, which is the most amazing craggy mountain pass that you keep looking up hour after hour, and it's still way up ahead of you. And when you finally reach the top, it's totally defined, meaning there's like a a 15-foot wide area, which is the exact top of that pass, and you can see a steep decline on either side. And as you look over, there's the Trient Glacier. And a lot of glaciers are impressive, but they're just sort of like a snowfield. But this was a real glacier. This was a glacier to write home to Mom about, because it really looked like one's impression of a glacier. And after kind of having all those endorphins kicking in through the ascent and then seeing the glacier, it was incredibly special. In terms of, well, the evenings, because that's a whole nother thing. These social situations happen when folks of like mind, different cultures, coming from different places, get thrown together in these remote mountain huts. That great magic happens. There's a spot in France. Now, this is like day 6 after going through the 3 countries, and it comes back into France, where my pals and I had an experience that most people don't have, which is really letting our hair down mutually with a French family. And it was 3 generations, a grandpa and a father, and they're like 15-year-old kids who were on at least that section of the trek. And we're staying together in this little refugio, drinking wine. This was after a great dinner with coq au vin, served by beautiful French girls, and it was just wonderful. And we joined them in a game of Uno, a French version of the game Uno, a simple card game. And I speak enough French to get by. And it was just like, wow. For like 2 hours, we were laughing and insulting and playing with each other. And if you've ever been to Paris or any other kind of French city, it's very, very difficult to interact with the locals. They don't have any tolerance for tourists, and it's just, that's not where they're coming from. And here it was exactly the opposite, and we really laughed ourselves silly. That was a special evening.
Although, as we've mentioned on this program before, that to think of all Frenchmen as Parisians is similar to thinking of all Americans as New Yorkers.
Well, this is true. This is very true. But if you go to Lyon, or if you go to, the north, or just about Carcassonne or Avignon, generally speaking, French folks don't really like to interact a whole lot with tourists, unless maybe they're perfectly fluent in French. But there is some truth to that stereotype, and we had experienced the opposite, and that was pretty fun.
Excellent. Anything else stand out as a highlight of this trip?
Well, first of all, I should say that folks who just want to hike a section can, or a day trip, should definitely do this. Because, to equip yourself and be prepared to do this big circumnavigation of the mountain is one thing. But the way to do that is to go to Chamonix, which is more famous for its winter sports, because that's, folks do a lot of downhill skiing. Chamonix is on the valley floor, but the mountain's up above it. Or there's all kinds of cross-country ski routes that go through that general area. But from the valley floor, there is a cable car that goes up to a peak that is actually part of the Mont Blanc Massif, which is called Aiguille du Midi, which is hard to say. It's spelled Aiguille, du Midi, and Aiguille means pinnacle. And from the valley floor, you can look up and see it. It's at like 12,000 feet. At the very, very top, you can see something that looks like Dr. Evil's castle. It's like this metal rocket ship looking thing coming to a sharp spire. And it's very dramatic, that you can see from the valley floor, albeit very small. And then you take a cable car up that way. In fact, you have to change cars in the middle. And it's, I think, a 9,000-foot ascent, which takes you to the very top of that mountain, longest cable car in the world and all that stuff. And it is highly recommended. Everybody should do this, because once you get up there, so you have a complete view, 360. You're deep in snow, so even though I was there in July, it was full snow, and it's a jumping off point for a lot of mountain trekking and climbing. So there's this one area where you stand, and it's sort of like an ice tunnel, and you as an observer are not supposed to go into that ice tunnel that leads out to the mountainside, but all of the climbers and the other mountain trekkers are all gearing up and getting ready to go. It's a very rarefied view of what it's like to be climbing on a mountain like that. Very different from the non-technical trekking that I was doing, where, we did go over some snowfields, but generally it's just walking and scrambling. So that's a fantastic thing to do when you're in the area. And from Chamonix, you can also go up the other side on a cable car, which then puts you exactly on the TMB, and there you can do day hikes and things as well. Any
warning you would give? Were there moments that you thought, why did I get myself into this?
Well, as any trekker knows, there's a point when you're just going up a mile or 7,000 feet and carrying your pack, and you just go, what was I thinking? As you're trudging through thin air and hyperventilating and whatever. But once you get to the top, you forget it all. So I think that there's always those particular cycles. But other than that, I can't really imagine anything that people wouldn't like about this, with the sole exception that in high season, which I think starts a little bit later, like maybe the end of July, you actually want to and need to make reservations at these refugios. And I didn't, mainly because I was one person, but it was a little tight. And in more than one occasion, I was able to crash in on the reservation that my newly found trail mates had made. And that saved me. But that would be quite a bummer to arrive somewhere and not really have a place to stay. I'm sure some of these places are not accessible by roads. In fact, one of them, like Refugio Bonatti, everything's brought in by helicopter, but others are near towns or in towns or accessible by road, and that would mean you'd have to probably get a ride a couple miles off the main trail to go find some place to stay. So not the end of the world, but certainly better to stay on the trail and keep it pristine.
Excellent.
In Italy, there's one particular refugio that I want to mention about, and a funny story that happened to me there. It's called Refugio Bonatti. It's newly built. I think it just opened 3-4 years ago. It's built for the ages, hewn from giant stones and beautifully laid out. And this is the one that is accessible only by helicopter. It's named after a famous climber named Walter Bonatti, who I didn't even realize I was looking at his pictures on the wall because I thought they were ads for jeans from the 70s. I thought someone thought it would be fun to put up ads from that era. This guy is like drop dead handsome, and there's photos of him, on a rock somewhere or whatever, and apparently is sort of a national hero. But in any case, I got there and really after an incredibly difficult long day of trekking, and I took a quick snooze, probably 5 to 6, knowing that dinner is 6:30. You eat it communally at tables, but you are assigned to specific tables, and there's a little handwritten placard with your name, and my last name is Barach. I was a half hour late for dinner. It started at 6. I didn't realize that, so I show up at 6:30, and then about 8 or 9 people who are at my table stand up and start applauding when I get there. And I'm confused, and I think, why would they be? Are they like making a joke because I'm late? And they can see the quizzical look on my face, and then they hold up my placard. It was a Dutchman who said, "Oh, we are so delighted to have you here, Mr. Barack Obama." And then he holds up my card that doesn't say Barack on it, but close enough. And I just really appreciated that warm welcome. And also it was a view as to how much the Europeans, this was early in the first term presidency, they loved him and still do. But it was good to see that insight. And then we talked politics quite a bit that evening, which is something that people do in Europe. But in the States, it would be gauche. No one would ever talk to a foreign visitor about politics. We don't even like to talk about it all that much unless we know the people very, very well. But in Europe, as an American, you sort of represent the United States. And since we're the big name out there, everyone feels compelled to share their opinions, even those that have cultures that are known for their fine and restrained manners, like the Dutch. And I've heard it both ways. In the prior presidency, I got an earful, and certainly with this one.
Interesting. In terms of the 3 countries, you're right there in the border region where the borders haven't been that way all the time. I don't think of a lot of differences, for instance, between France and the French-speaking part of Switzerland. Did you notice differences significantly as you crossed over the borders?
Well, I wasn't expecting that there would be, but they were very marked differences. Like going from France into Italy, the minute, sat down for dinner at the first Italian refugio, the food was better. It was more expansive. The place was louder. And there were all these like roly-poly kids, the family that works there, who you could tell were no stranger to the pasta table, who were serving. And it just was an entirely different kind of experience. There was extra food. And the France thing was your food, and that's pretty much what it was. So I could see it immediately in the food. And then back into Switzerland after Italy, things got more restrained and quiet again. So there are certainly changes of that nature. And then you do see different flags. But for a foreign visitor who is always used to borders and checkpoints, there is something magical about crossing mountain passes between countries, and it's easy to let your mind go to some of those great movies we've seen where you might be escaping in war and trekking through and sneaking across borders to evade the enemy. And I sort of played with that in my mind as I would go between countries. But right now it's completely seamless, and I can't even imagine how you could create checkpoints on those borders because there's so many places to cross, not just in the mountain passes where it's most convenient.
Picture, if you will, for me, the most beautiful spot along the trail. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Wow, as there's so many to choose from. I would have to put it to that spot I mentioned already near the Trient Glacier. And first of all, you have a two-sided view of both where you've come from and looking across at the mountain, and then on the other side, looking at the glacier and a deep valley. So I have to say that that's probably among the most beautiful. I took hundreds of photos, and then when I looked at them, I just was totally disappointed because not being a professional photographer, having really great equipment, it just never captures what you're seeing. And it's so majestic and so out of scale with what people typically see. Very different from the Sierras, although it bears some resemblance. Just beautiful. Every single scene has been handcrafted for maximum beauty. But I would point to that particular one. And then at the end of a long, tough day, seeing the Refugio up ahead is also one of the most beautiful sights. You know, there's a cold beer waiting for you, good camaraderie, nice warm bed, and that's pretty good too.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only around Mont Blanc.
Well, the common greeting on the trail, in spite of the three languages that are spoken, is bonjour, hello. So as you're walking counterclockwise and other people are walking clockwise, everyone chooses their direction. And as you cross, you say bonjour to each other. And what I noticed there is that the women on the trail would say it in a very high and sing-songy voice, almost to the point where you had to have dog ears to hear it. It was so high-pitched. And the first one would be like, bonjour, and the next one would be, bonjour. And I can't even go higher than that. But when we would meet people and hear that, that would always be a source of amusement, and probably the only place that's the greeting of choice outside of France, I would say.
Interesting. Anything else before we wrap this up? I've got two more questions for you. Anything else that people should know before they go hiking around Mont Blanc?
Well, I would only say that, it sounds like you have to be in fantastic shape to be on a trip like this. And in fact, you should be in good shape. But most of this type of mid-distance hiking is in the mind and not so much in the body. It's just being resolute and wanting to do it. So I would totally suggest to people that this is one route that's a good place to go to, because at any point, if you feel like jumping off and getting on a bus and going back to your starting point, be it because you're tired or for any other reason, this is one route that's highly suitable for that. A lot of other places are just so inaccessible that once you're underway, you're underway. I think that makes it special, the fact that it's so remote, and yet every day you're in some kind of urban setting where you can get transportation and so forth. So if anyone were thinking of maybe trying this type of trekking, this one is a very high reward route to go on, and also one where you can be flexible and change your plans as you go along.
Excellent. Last two questions. Finish this sentence. You really know you're at Mont Blanc when what?
When the most amazing snow-covered Alps are in front of you and you're no longer really paying attention because you've gotten used to it.
And if you had to summarize your experience in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Well, the first one's hyphenated, and that's jaw-dropping,
Okay.
intense, and liberating.
Liberating. Now,
Yeah.
why liberating?
Well, because you just feel very powerful when it's you and your boots. You got places to go, and you just strap them on in the morning, and you hit the trail, and all kinds of pleasures unfold in front of you throughout the day, capped by great laughing and fun and camaraderie in the evenings, and do it again, and it's just you and your boots. There's nothing else going on except your willpower and desire to experience this. And I find that very liberating in a time and in a world where we're always surrounded by lots of accoutrements and lots of communications tools and lots of transportation options.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little more minimalist, not like camping in the Alaskan wilds, but it's a little more minimalist, and I find that to be very liberating.
Excellent. Mark, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and telling us more of your experience.
Thank you so much, Chris.
In news of the community, this email made my week this week. Got a letter from Rachel who said, "Hey Chris, just wanted to drop a line and thank you for the wonderful podcast. My sister Molly and I have been listening to it for years and are finally heading out of our home state of New Mexico to explore the world. We are 22 and 24 years old, recent college grads, and have carefully hoarded our student loans to fund a month of backpacking in Europe this summer. Your podcast has been a big inspiration to us as well as an invaluable resource for our planning. Keep up the great work and thanks for all you do." I'm always very much encouraged to hear that people are actually using some of the advice we talk about on the show and going to some of the destinations we talk about. And to Molly and Rachel, bon voyage. I heard from Ed, who commented on the recent episode on Belgium. I listened to the Belgium podcast and thought I'd tell you a little more about speculoos. Speculoos is a popular cookie. The most prevalent version is made by Lotus. It's sold in the U.S. as Bischoff, and you can find it in the grocery and specialty stores like Andronico's and Cost Plus. The spread is just ground up cookie mix with a little oil. Trader Joe's sells a chocolate bar filled with the stuff, and it's pretty good too. I loved the part about the Trappist beers. I'm a big fan of them too. Can you get a link to the website that rates Westvleteren as the number one in the world? I couldn't find it. I'll have to look for that, Ed. One correction for the show notes. Königshofen is the brewery. La Trappe is used for the beer produced by another brewery, albeit on the monastery grounds. Königshofen is the only one of the 7 outside of Belgium in Netherlands. Ed, thanks for the information and for the correction. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also join in the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler, or follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.